Welcome everybody to this weekend camp meeting. I want to begin by attempting to answer a few questions that I've received. So I don't normally do this to put people on the spot. But someone asked me a question about Catherine's presentation yesterday. I'm just going to ask her now. She didn't know. So you probably won't be able to hear her, so I'm just going to repeat what she says, if she says anything. So I've been in what I might describe as a long-term conversation with a friend in the movement. And it's about Panium. So I know lots of people are talking about Panium. And Catherine mentioned it yesterday in her presentation. So for quite some time now, we have understood Panium to be 2021. I just want to remind everybody that the discussion or the subject of Panium is not new. It's an old subject. It's been on our radar for 6 years. And Elder Tess was not the first person to bring that, we'll call it a battle, bring that battle to our understanding. Just a general comment. I think many of us have either forgotten or have got into a habit of not reviewing old material. In addition to that, a lot of the older material, when people left the movement, they took their material with them. So this is just an admonition or an encouragement that we should be reviewing older material. So Panium, I suspect the majority of us understand it to be an information war. And I think most of us have got some level of understanding that it's connected with the war in Ukraine. And it's not a straightforward subject. Plus, we haven't been very precise in our language in the past. But the concept of information war, cold wars, and hot wars are terms that we use, but I think aren't well understood. So I'm going to simplify the question. Are we still in Panium? Is the information war that began in 2021, are we still in that information war? And is the war in Ukraine Panium or something else? Catherine, do you have any thoughts on that? Because you did mention some of those aspects.
In my mind, Panium is in 2021.
Go ahead.
Okay. In my mind, 2021, Panium is behind us, that waymark.
Okay, so Catherine believes that the waymark of Panium has come to its end. And go ahead. And when did it end? It ended in 2021? Or spilled over into 22?
It might have spilled into 2022, early 2022.
So the question is, when did Panium end? And she has said it spilled into early 2022. Is that before February, the invasion?
Picture it.
She believes it ended before the invasion began. You want to add anything else?
We knew that there would be a progressive fall for Russia over that dispensation between 2021 and Sunday Law. So the continuation of the war in Ukraine, I see as that intermediate period.
So she recognizes that the King of the South would fall. From 2021 Panium to the Sunday Law. But the history that we're now in is not Panium. What would you say that it is?
I set a dot of the line about 2/3 of the way along, but I'm not sure why I do that.
I'm going to reframe my question. Does it have a historical precedence or history that we could identify it with a name or something? What history are we in if we're past Panium?
We could line it up with the period from, sorry. We can line it up with 1989 to 1991.
Past history. Like Panium is a historical event. Is there a history that we're going to go to find out where we are now? So Catherine said that she doesn't know a historical story to explain where we are now. But in our own history, it's a repeat of
1989 to 1990.
It's a repeat of 1989 to 1991. 89 to 91. And Catherine, what is that?
Yes.
So she's lining up the fall of the USSR from 89 to 91 with our current history. that correct? And Catherine's lining that up with 1989 to 1991. Is that correct? And she says this is Pallium. It's the year, but it's the point. And this history here is the progressive fall of the King of the South. Okay, so I hope that answers that person's question. Okay, so I was just reading what the questioner had said after that. Okay, so I hope that answers your question, and they might come back. Okay, so I had another question. This is on Acts 27. The island of Melita. What island is Melita? Malta. So everyone here knew it was Malta. So Paul is on the island of Malta. And I don't know if the question is connected to the presentation that was done yesterday. Or to some of the thoughts and ideas that I've introduced in the recent past. So we all know that Paul becomes famous in Malta. So I'm not going to go to the verses because I think we're very familiar with that story. Certain things happen in that story. There's the snake. And then there's the Roman governor's father. I think his name is Publius. It's Publius' father who gets healed. And those two events propel Paul to fame. And we have taught that the arrival on the island is what waymark for us. I can't hear. Who's speaking? I didn't hear what they said. Sunday law. Sunday law. So we've taught that that's Sunday law. And the questioner understands that. So you can guess what the question is. Based upon Catherine's studies and comments that I've made in the past. And those on Zoom, what you're not aware of is the discussions that we had after her studies here at camp. It didn't answer that question, but there was some discussion around that subject. So the questioner is asking the following. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me now? Sorry. So the questioner understands that and he's asking the following. I'm going to quote him. Knowing that at the Sunday law going forward, we're supposed to interact with the Nethinims and he's basing that on Acts 27 or into 28. What does that look like in our time? So what does it look like, the interaction that we have with the Nethinims? So if we compare Acts 27, we are whom in that story? So everybody here said Paul. And the Nethinims are whom? The islanders, the people from Malta who live there. Okay, so I'm going to ask maybe two people here. What they make of that story, what they understood or what they think they understood that Catherine was teaching yesterday. And what they think they've heard me say in the past. So there are three stories, if you like. Acts, Catherine, me. I'm only using Catherine because it's topical when we're at this camp meeting. I'm not trying to pick on her study or do anything negative. And we all have our own ideas anyway, I think. Okay, so one volunteer to put their hand up. Okay, so Curtis is going to go first. So the question is, we've got Acts 27, where Paul is literally famous because of his good works. What does that mean for us today, Curtis?
If we take the three separate stories.
Go ahead.
If we take the three separate stories that we give us.
So if we take those three stories,
Paul going to fame in Acts 27.
When Paul becomes famous in Acts 27,
he's giving something to the Maltesians that they don't have.
He's going to give something to the people of Malta that they don't have.
In the study that Catherine did yesterday,
In the study that was done yesterday by Catherine,
there's an element that this movement gives the Nethinims that they don't have, if that's the conclusion that we draw from that.
so Curtis has drawn the conclusion that there is something that we will give the Nethinims.
In those two literal histories, because Catherine used the 1850s history and Acts 27, that's literally going to them and giving them those truths.
So in yesterday's study, we know that Catherine spoke of the 1850 history. And if we layer that on to Acts 27, in both stories, God's people literally go or are required to go to the world. And the marker that she used for that was the 1850 chart.
The third component, which is what you've taught,
So the third part that I've intimated
is that our relationship with the Levites and the Nethinims is not physical and literal.
So I've suggested that our relationship with the Nethinims is not literal. That's what Curtis has said.
So while we have two literal missionary works being done, and what I understand, your past teachings is that the relationship with the Nethinims is a spiritual relationship. So whatever that looks like doesn't look like these literal works that are being done.
So Curtis understands that in the book of Acts and in 1850, there was literal evangelism going on. And he says that today, in the future, in the Sunday law, of course, there's not going to be literal evangelism, there's going to be spiritual evangelism. So it's a spiritual manifestation of those histories. And what does that mean?
We're not specifically having physical contact with them, giving them a message.
We're not going to have contact with them.
Or whatever message they are getting from God is coming externally. Is not coming from us.
So they will be evangelized, not by us, but by a message that originates from God. Okay, so in summary, one of our members here believes the following: that despite the 1850 history and the Book of Acts history, we won't be doing evangelism to the Nethinims, but they will be receiving a message from God without defining what that means. It's the test, but it's not going to come from us. And so the inference or the suggestion is that it will come from an external source, which would essentially be the world. Is that fair representation? He agrees with that. Anyone else wants to say something? Any? Brian?
That, other than what Curtis is saying, if that's not what's going to happen, God's going to have to empower us to do some great thing that's going to attract attention to the messages.
So Brian has said that if Curtis is wrong, then the book of Acts will have to be literally fulfilled. In some fashion, we have to become famous. And so we become the center of attention. And obviously that's based on an Acts 27 model. And even though Brian didn't say that, so I say the following, not the past. This is exactly the same model that Ellen White provides. She suggests that we will be projected into the national discussion. And you can go to the 1890s to get evidence for that. Right? Anything else? So I just want to ask Brian, which one do you favor? Your voice? So he believes that some event is going to happen that will make us famous, and the public will know who we are, and we'll have a platform to share our message with the world. So if I can frame it this way, without defining what those circumstances are, one of our members says that the movement's standard or traditional teaching on the Sunday law is correct. Is that fair representation?
Yeah.
So in our little group here, we have differing views on what the future looks like. Brian, did you have that understanding before yesterday?
It was my wish always that I've always expressed that we have to be able to be outstanding in the world to get this message across. Otherwise, then it's going to have to be the way Curtis has projected it.
So I hope everybody on Zoom understands that I'm rephrasing people's responses. So Brian has said he's never let go of the old ways. And embraced these new ideas. Anyone else? No thoughts? Shy?
Is there a third way, middle way,
Start again, sorry.
is there a third or middle way where a representation of the character is represented by a group of people?
Sorry, could you repeat that? Someone did something to my Zoom.
Is there a third way? So in between where a group of people are used as a representation of the people who will be saved. And they do some evangelism, but most of it is spiritual. But that is the physical evangelism will be done by a small group, but it's a representation of what broadly happens.
Before I get that translated, that small group, you're talking about us? So the question is, or suggestion, Curtis says that none of us do a work for the Nephilims. Brian says that all of us as a movement do a work for the Nephilims. And Courtney has suggested, that maybe only a few of us do this work. So I just want to ask you, Courtney, just a short response. Those few people who do that work, are they sent or are they independent workers?
Independent work.
He said that they're independent workers. Okay, so I want to comment now on that. And I have suggested, mostly in private, not so much in public, say, perhaps, that if you go and do an independent work, you're not representing a movement. So I don't think that would qualify. What we have to be careful about is reading Paul's history, because in many ways he's an independent atom, but we treat him as a representative of the movement back then. Okay, Catherine, do you have any thoughts?
Thoughts about what it looks like going to the Nephilim?
So the question is, we've got stories, literal stories, that give this idea that we go to the world. And we've built a whole theology, a doctrine, that we are at the center of the great controversy during the Sunday law history. And it's built upon these stories and similar ones. Curtis said that that version is no longer fit for purpose. Brian said it's still correct, it's still sound. And that's my question, Catherine.
My expectation has been that we will do work on behalf of the movement, but in our personal spheres of influence.
So Catherine's response was similar to Courtney's. That each of us will just do the work that lies nearest, a personal independent work. Is that fair representation?
By independent, are you saying it's not part of the movement?
So I'm going to define what independent means. Whoever we want to define leadership as, whether it's me, a continental leader or a ministry leader, they have not explicitly sent you out to do something or speak to people. There's no coordination. There's no organization. It's just an individual member of the movement deciding that they need to speak at some moment to somebody. That's what I mean by independent.
That's the view that I had. That's the view that I had, although it doesn't sound very good now that you've said what you said.
I want to add that I don't mean to put a negative connotation to that. Because she and others are nervous that they're acting rebelliously. And when I've discussed this subject in the past, this particular issue, I think some people have had their zeal chilled, if I can say it that way, because there's a misunderstanding of what this issue would mean. So I'm not suggesting that an independent work is wrong or bad or rebellious. But I am suggesting it doesn't fit the criteria of a movement-led initiative. So, did you want to respond?
You didn't. That's the view that I held up until now, and yeah, I don't know. The way I was seeing it was how you described it. So then.
Okay, so no more comment. She's happy-ish. So,
I think I agree with the previous speakers' thoughts. I feel that obviously I've got a lot less knowledge on the movement in general. I feel some of the problems may come with accountability, in that owning the act of being independent gives us accountability. So which is why we probably shy away from the idea of being independent. But I do agree that for example, I feel I am one of the testimonies of the spoken word of the movement. So whilst we may not be acting, we may not think that we're acting on a majority, we are talking and influencing our circles. We are talking and spreading, kind of like what Dad is saying, that we are still spreading a word out there, even if it's not on a grand scale.
Okay, so that was more of a testimony than a question, I think. And it's reiterating the point that there is no negativity, certainly not in my mind, when people go ahead and are moved by the Holy Spirit to speak to people. That fair representation? Yeah, what I do want to disagree with what you said is that's not what Brian said, I don't think. He spoke. Sorry?
Sorry, because I couldn't say being in the middle.
Oh, Courtney, I thought you said.
No, I did.
Okay. Okay, so I won't comment anymore then. That's fine. Any other thoughts?
Can I just clarify that that's what everyone's been doing all along? So that's no different when we get to Sunday Law and our cry than what we've been doing all along. If you go with that.
Yes, I'll try and repeat everybody's things. So we're talking about the Sunday Law and what it looks like. And I'm going to stick to that term, doing an independent work. I'll add another way of expressing it, a personal work, because that may be less offensive. I wasn't trying to be offensive when I said independent, because I think it is an important concept to understand. I'll give an example. This movement, right from its inception, when we went to Daniel chapter 12, we defined the wise as what? As teachers. Someone has said as teachers. And following that idea about teachers, all of us are wise. We developed another model that says we're all priests. And what's the primary role of a priest? It's not someone who does sacrifices, it's a teacher, someone has just said. So based upon that model, we have had a culture which has not worked well, because I'm just going to say all of you, generally, not just here, but on video, want to work, and what word am I going to use now? Independently. You don't want to do as you're told. Because you see it that some leader somewhere is randomly bossing you around and telling you what to do. And so the subject is about teaching. And people will come up with all manner, I'm going to call them excuses. I'm shy, I don't understand things. You can fill in whatever you want. But those leaders never set the rules. This is not a human being pushing people around. It's a theology, an ideology based upon a Bible passage or a Bible concept. And when you qualify as a priest, literally in the house of Aaron, when it's your roster, in the time of Christ, the priesthood was rostered on, we'll say, on a monthly basis. You don't tell people, I'm not available. Because you get kicked out, you lose your job. But this movement is full of independent workers who think they have a right to be independent because they think it's of leadership, but it's really of God and their job function. This is not a telling off session about teaching. It's a parable. When we're required to teach, every single one of us, it's not some kind of organizational issue. It's a prophetic matter. And so when I said people are doing an independent missionary work, all of you have got your lives, you've got your personalities. And you've got legitimate reasons not to teach when you're asked to. And whilst we're all free to teach when we want, if we want, when we want, if we want, we're all free to teach if we want, when we want. In the same way, we're free to evangelize if we want, when we want. Back in 2014, 9 years ago, we received a message. Courtney, what was that message? I asked Courtney because I knew he wouldn't know. Emma brought this subject up a minute ago. What was the issue? Or no public evangelism. Said something. Yeah, Courtney wouldn't have known that, which is why I asked him. But he should have known it's related to his statement earlier, so he could have figured it out. 9 years ago, when the message came, no public evangelism, Catherine, have a guess what priests in the movement, what their reaction to that message was. What did they say? What did they think?
It's against the thus saith the Lord.
What is against the thus saith the Lord?
No evangelizing.
No, more specifically. Brian,
Go out and
who?
the Levites and the
Not to whom?
the world.
Please.
Individual priests. You can translate now. Independent priests were not allowed to talk to anybody. People thought no public evangelism meant you're not allowed to speak to your parents or your uncle or your church friend. Some people here smiled when I said that, but it took several years to become balanced. So that message was there would be no organized work. It was never an instruction that individual members could do whatever they wanted to do, say whatever they wanted to say. So earlier, Emma made a comment that these differing views, these contradictory views about what will happen in the Sunday law, when it comes to doing a personal work, which I call an independent work, is nothing new. It's not a Sunday law dispensational issue. It's something that we've been doing for the past 9 years, speaking to friends, family, individuals. Even people who aren't Adventist, we're allowed to speak to. So I don't know if that's just a reminder to many of us, it's a reminder. Maybe for some people it's new. But that's why I've said that this idea of doing a personal work in the Sunday law history does not qualify as a prophetic phenomena. It's not meant to put a stop to people doing work for others. Everybody okay? Any questions? Okay, so I'm going to go back to two models. Either we don't go to the world, and somehow or another they will catch the message, or we do go to the world. Now, I guess since September last year, I've been speaking about the priests, Levites, and Nethinims. And I've focused on the Levites, but not really spoken about the Nethinims. So, based upon 3 people Curtis, Brian, and Catherine. When I say Catherine, I mean what she taught in her second presentation yesterday. What you don't know on Zoom, but you can guess, is that her hour Zoom presentation was followed, I think, I'm going to say an hour and a half further discussion. And it's in the further discussion that she clarified and refined her points. So you all missed that. And without knowing what was discussed then, you won't perhaps be able to answer the question that I'm going to pose now. But the people in our little group here will. So the question is, we've got Curtis's model and Brian's model. And Catherine said something in her presentation. My question is, what is the problem with Curtis's model? Because it's a big problem. And you must understand what that issue, what his problem, not his problem, what the problem with his model is. Even though he might say, well, he got it from me. Because he made it sound something like something really good. Especially when you start talking about spiritual things. And we might say of Brian's model, forget Paul. One man did not turn the world upside down, even though it says that. He really didn't. And Brian suggesting 500 of us are going to flip 7 billion people. What we understand what flip means. They have to make a decision. Aided and abetted by myself, with my help, many people in the movement don't believe that can happen now. Because I've sent a chill, I've discouraged people from that crazy idea. Except Brian. And I'm not trying to say it in a joking way. I'm saying he represents a group of people in the movement who don't believe what Curtis has said. And Curtis kind of got that from me. I want to answer someone else's question, which is related to this, but completely different. And it's going to give you a bit more time to answer my question about what is the problem with Curtis's model. Do you know what the answer to my question is, Catherine? Yeah. Yes. Okay, so Catherine thinks that she's got it, what the issue is. Independent question. My question is, what will happen to the Nethinims that they will not be translated alive at the second advent? It's a bigger question. It's about Levites and Nethinims. It's about the 144,000. And it's about translation for those Nethinims. Okay, Catherine, what's the problem with Curtis's model? Because he made it sound really good. He said, don't worry. We can't do the job, but God will. Fair enough. Or you don't. We don't do the job, but it's going to be. They're going to have spiritual evangelism. You say. You said that.
I said that, but I think it misses out because what I suspect the danger is that those other two components that were in the presentation.
Oh, don't give it the answer away. Go ahead, Catherine.
The Nethinims, what the Nethinims need is a message about prophecy and reforms.
What the Nethinims need are a message, you said? Go ahead. On reforms and prophecy. They need a message on reforms and prophecy.
If we are not the one teaching them that, there is no one else.
We are the only people that are able to give them those two components.
And our job function is teachers.
And because our job function is teachers, we would be the ones that do that teaching. So I was unfair to Curtis because Curtis already figured that out sometime through this discussion. But I used his point to bring something to the surface. I don't know if I've said this privately or publicly. Let me ask a question. Is God able to, I'm going to use the term that Curtis used, is God able to do spiritual evangelism?
No.
So Curtis said yes before he said God's. He said, yeah, he's backing out now. And no.
Are you talking dreams and visions?
Yeah.
Yeah, what do you mean by God?
I didn't define what you said, external sources. But those external forces are doing a prophetic message from God.
As do we. So we used God as the thing, but we're just proxies.
Yeah.
Yes.
So he was. I'll do the translation in a minute. He wasn't talking about dreams and visions. He's using proxies like we are. So the definition of spiritual evangelism was confined that we, the movement, won't be doing this work, but other human beings will. We don't literally do this work, but it's done to the world through literal agents, but it's a spiritual evangelism. Okay, so now that we're all on the same page, we understand what the problem is. Let's summarize. What is the problem with the model that Curtis has presented to us? Let me break the question down. When you're doing evangelism, what are you offering somebody? Salvation. So I wanted to use another phrase besides salvation, which is the tool to get to salvation. When you evangelize, you don't know if they're going to accept or reject. So you have to force them to make a decision. And what do we call that, what we're doing? We're giving them the everlasting gospel. So without the gospel, can a person be saved? And when you're doing evangelism, if I say, oh, come around for a meal, the weather's good, some introductory thoughts, is that evangelism? No, there might be tools to break down barriers. What's the entering wedge for evangelism that we all know? Sorry, I have to do it. Let me translate. That's why. Health. Yeah, so health, the health message is the entering wedge. But it's not the gospel, and it's only an introductory part of evangelism. And if evangelism remained with the health reform message, would it be of any use? Because the end goal is salvation, we've said. So the answer is no, it would not be of any use. So what has been said, if we, this movement, don't give the message to the world, to the Nethinims, will they understand? I'm going to call it the reform message. Which is equality. Will they understand that from the world? Well, I'm going to say yes. We've got a couple of different answers, but yes, they can. They get that from the world. but it's not sufficient for salvation. So if it's not sufficient for salvation, is there actually a term, a concept as spiritual evangelism? Brian said we have to do this work. No, Brian said we will do this work. It was Catherine that says we're the only ones that can do this work. And Curtis was saying the world will do it equally well. But obviously they can't. So unless we do that work, what's the result for the Nephilims, Magda? If we don't do the work, what's the result for the Nephilims? So that means everyone in the world dies. So you said a minute ago she says they can't be saved, and then she shrugged her shoulders when I gave the same question more pointedly. The reason I pointed that out is because we all do that. And it's good that we do that. When someone presses us, we should pause and be careful about what we're about to say. So it's good that's what she did. Go ahead, Magda. If we don't do a job, what happens to the Nephilims?
God usually pays someone who does do the job.
God will find someone to do their job. That's what Curtis said. And Catherine said there is nobody.
We should do the job. But it's line of success, so we should do the job.
So it's a what?
Line of success. So we we should do the job. I don't know.
My question was, if we don't do it, what happens?
So we'll be lost.
They will all be lost. I think colloquially we say they all die. So this question about translation and the 144,000, it's answered. If we don't do this job, everybody dies. And if we're talking about the Nephilims, we can just extend that to the Levites as well. In closing, either we go to the world, not personally, not independently, not individually. But we have a movement initiative, which means someone has to give the green light that we can now do public evangelism whenever the now is. We'll say Sunday law. Unless that switch or that button is pressed, Everyone dies. There's no hope for them. And them is the Nethinims. And everyone is not 7 billion people. Because I'm not talking about the personal work that you do. And I think many of us, I'm not saying I'm correct necessarily, but I don't think many of us have still conceptualized what that means or how it works. But it's nothing new. This tension has existed for 9 years in our movement. And if you can get it straight in your mind, you'll understand about the Sunday law, personal work or movement work. Personal or movement. Okay, we'll close this prayer now and we'll continue our discussion later today. Let's pray. Holy God, we thank you. It's only as we wrestle one with another, like Jacob, we wrestle with you, who really was wrestling with himself. It's only in this struggle, the struggle that you have given to us, that we can become the people of prophecy. May each of us come to a clearer understanding of the truth. As we see time running away from us. In Jesus' name, amen.